Hello, and welcome to tonight's gentle journey through history. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet time with me as we drift back through the centuries together. Tonight, we're going to explore something beautifully ordinary, something that connects us to every person who has ever lived, the simple, timeless act of washing clothes. Close your eyes if you'd like, or let them rest softly as we travel back to the year 1500. Feel yourself sinking deeper into your pillow as we leave behind the rush of modern life and step into a world where time moved like honey, where the rhythm of days was marked not by clocks, but by the sun's gentle arc across the sky. In this peaceful journey, we'll discover how our ancestors 500 years ago turned the simple task of cleaning their garments into something almost ceremonial. We'll walk beside them through cobblestone streets where the sound of your footsteps mingles with the distant murmur of voices and the soft splash of water against stone. Breathe deeply now and let your shoulders relax. Tonight, there's nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. Just rest here with me as we unfold this gentle story of soap and water, of careful hands and patient hearts, of a time when even the most ordinary tasks were touched with a kind of quiet magic. Let us begin by stepping into this world of 5 centuries past. The year is 1500, and if you could walk through any town or village in Europe, you would find yourself in a place both familiar and wonderfully strange. The air carries scents we rarely experience today, with smoke curling from chimneys, the earthy smell of unpaved roads after rain, herbs drying in cottage gardens, and yes, the clean, almost medicinal fragrance of lye soap drifting from washing areas. This was a world where most people owned perhaps 3 or 4 complete sets of clothing in their entire lifetime. Imagine that for a moment. Your wardrobe, instead of filling a closet, might fit in a single wooden chest. Every garment was precious, every thread valuable, because each piece represented hours of careful work, from the spinning of fibers to the final stitches. People moved through their days wearing layers. A linen undergarment against their skin, perhaps a woolen tunic or dress over that, and a cloak or shawl for warmth. These weren't clothes to be worn once and discarded. They were companions for years, sometimes decades, growing softer and more comfortable with each washing, each wear. The rhythm of life was different then. There were no electric lights to extend the day, no machines to hurry tasks along. Instead, people lived by the natural cycles of light and dark, of seasons and weather. And in this unhurried world, laundry was not a chore to be rushed through, but a ritual that brought communities together. In most households of the 1500s, there was one day each week dedicated entirely to washing clothes. Usually, this was Monday, though in some regions it might be Tuesday or Wednesday. This wasn't arbitrary. It was a carefully chosen day that followed the rhythm of the week like a gentle song. Sunday was for rest and worship, so Monday became the day to begin the week's work with fresh, clean clothing. Imagine waking on a Monday morning in 1500, perhaps to the sound of roosters calling across the village, the soft shuffling of feet on wooden floors above you, the distant sound of a church bell marking the early hour. The women of the household, and it was almost always women who handled the washing, would rise even earlier than usual on washing day. They moved quietly through the house, gathering the soiled garments that had accumulated over the week. Shirts and chemises, stockings and caps, aprons stained with cooking and work, cloaks that had absorbed the smoke of countless fires. These garments were sorted with the kind of attention we might give to precious gems. The finest linens, the delicate pieces, the sturdy everyday wear. Each category would be washed separately with different techniques, different care. Nothing was rushed. Everything was deliberate. You can almost hear the soft rustle of fabric as they worked, the gentle thud of wooden chests being opened, the whispered conversations between mothers and daughters, sisters and servants, as they planned their day. The house would fill with a sense of purpose, a quiet energy that spoke of important work about to begin. Water, something we turn on with a simple twist of our wrist, was precious beyond measure in the world of 1500. Every drop had to be carried, heated, and carefully used. The day's washing began with the gathering of this essential element, and it was a task that required both strength and planning. Some households were fortunate to have wells in their courtyards. Picture a stone-lined circle, perhaps covered with a wooden roof, where a rope and bucket waited patiently. The sound of the bucket descending into darkness, the splash as it met the water far below, the steady hand over hand pulling as it returned, heavy and dripping, to the surface. Other families made daily journeys to communal wells, springs, or rivers. Imagine walking through the early morning streets, carrying wooden buckets or clay jugs, joining a gentle procession of neighbors all bound for the same destination. These walks were social times, filled with quiet conversation, shared news, and the comfortable companionship of people engaged in the same essential task. The water itself was treated with respect. It might be slightly murky, carrying the minerals and essence of the earth it had traveled through to reach them. This wasn't the crystal clear, chemically treated water we know today, but something more alive, more connected to the natural world. For washing day, enormous quantities were needed. A single load of laundry might require 20 or 30 gallons of water. For soaking, for washing, for rinsing. All of this had to be transported one bucket at a time, often from quite a distance. It was work that built strong arms and backs, that created a deep appreciation for every precious drop. Once the water was gathered, it needed to be heated, and this was where the day's work truly began to take on an almost ceremonial quality. In the courtyard or kitchen, large copper or iron cauldrons were positioned over fires, ready to receive their precious cargo of water. Building the fire was an art in itself. Not the quick flick of a gas burner or the press of an electric switch, but the careful arrangement of kindling, the patient nurturing of tiny flames, the gradual addition of larger and larger pieces of wood. The fire needed to be hot enough to heat substantial amounts of water, but controlled enough to burn steadily for hours. You can almost smell the wood smoke now, can't you? That clean, ancient scent that seems to carry the essence of forests and time itself. The smoke would curl upward, sometimes catching the breeze and drifting across neighboring yards, mingling with similar fires throughout the community. On washing day, entire neighborhoods would be perfumed with the honest smell of burning wood and heating water. The cauldrons themselves were often family treasures passed down through generations. Made of copper that gleamed like burnished gold or iron blackened by countless fires, they were both practical tools and symbols of a household's prosperity. To own a large washing cauldron was to possess something of real value, something that enabled the essential work of keeping a family clean and healthy. As the water heated, steam would begin to rise, creating small clouds that caught the morning light. The temperature had to be judged by hand by the experienced touch of women who had been doing this work for decades. Too hot and delicate fabrics would be damaged. Too cool and the clothes wouldn't come truly clean. It was a skill learned through years of practice, passed from mother to daughter like a precious inheritance. Now let's pause for a moment to consider something we take completely for granted today, soap. In our modern world, we have hundreds of varieties, each promising different benefits, different scents, different experiences. But in 1500, soap was both simpler and more mysterious, a substance that seemed almost magical in its ability to transform dirty water into cleansing power. The soap of the medieval world was not the refined, perfumed bars we know today. Instead, it was something closer to the earth, something that carried the honest sense of its ingredients. Most soap was made from animal fats, tallow from cattle or sheep, combined with lye, which was produced by filtering water through wood ashes. Can you imagine the process? Picture a woman carefully collecting ashes from her fireplace, precious gray powder that represented the remains of wood that had once warmed her family. These ashes were placed in special containers with holes, almost like primitive filters, and water was slowly poured through them. The liquid that emerged was lye, caustic, powerful, and essential for soap making. The actual creation of soap was often a community event. Neighbors would gather, sharing their tallow and ashes, their knowledge and labor. Large pots would simmer for hours, filling the air with a distinctive smell that was somehow both harsh and clean, sharp and comforting. The mixture had to be stirred constantly, tested repeatedly until it reached just the right consistency. Some regions were famous for their soap. Castile in Spain produced a soap made from olive oil that was prized throughout Europe for its gentleness. Marseille in France had its own renowned soap-making traditions. These weren't just local products, but treasured goods that traveled along trade routes, carrying with them the reputation of their makers. For most families, though, soap was a homemade necessity created with whatever fats and ashes they could gather. It might be brown or gray, soft or hard, depending on the ingredients and the skill of the maker. But regardless of its appearance, it represented something almost miraculous, the ability to lift dirt and stains from fabric to restore cleanliness from chaos. Before any vigorous washing could begin, the clothes needed to be soaked, and this was perhaps the most peaceful part of the entire process. Large wooden tubs or stone basins were filled with warm water, and the garments were lowered in gently, like precious things being given a bath. The soaking wasn't hurried. Clothes might rest in the warm water for an hour, sometimes two, allowing the heat and moisture to penetrate deeply into the fibers, loosening the dirt and stains that had accumulated during the week. This was time for quiet conversation, for the sharing of news and stories, for the comfortable companionship of women working together. Picture the scene. Wooden tubs arranged in a sunny courtyard, steam rising gently from the surface of the water, creating small rainbows in the morning light. The women would move between the tubs, occasionally lifting a garment to check its progress, their hands becoming intimately familiar with each piece of fabric, each stubborn stain. Different fabrics required different approaches. Fine linen might be soaked in cooler water to preserve its delicate fibers. Woolens needed special care to prevent shrinking or felting. Cotton, still relatively rare and precious in 1500, was treated with particular reverence. Each material had its own needs, its own preferences, and the experienced laundress knew them all. The water itself would gradually change color as it drew out the accumulated grime of daily life. What had started as clear liquid would become cloudy, sometimes tinted brown or gray, visible evidence of the cleaning power at work. This transformation was somehow satisfying, proof that the process was working, that cleanliness was being restored. Children might play nearby during this peaceful time, their voices adding a cheerful counterpoint to the adult conversation. Dogs would doze in sunny corners, occasionally opening one eye to watch the proceedings. The whole scene had an air of timeless domesticity, of essential work being done with patience and care. After the long, peaceful soak, it was time for the more active work of scrubbing. But even this wasn't the violent, aggressive process you might imagine. Instead, it was rhythmic, almost meditative, a dance between human hands and stubborn fabric. The washing was often done on specially designed boards, wooden surfaces carved with ridges and grooves that helped work the soap and water through the cloth. These washboards were treasured tools often passed down through families, worn smooth by generations of use. Each had its own character, its own slightly different texture and feel. The garments were lifted from their soaking water, heavy and dripping, and laid across these boards. Then came the gentle but persistent work of scrubbing, using bars of homemade soap and the skilled pressure of experienced hands. It was work that required strength, but also sensitivity. Too much force could damage delicate fabrics, too little wouldn't remove the embedded dirt. Listen to the sounds this work would make, the soft splash of water, the rhythmic scrubbing of fabric against wood, the occasional ring of a bucket being set down, the quiet breathing of women focused on their task. These weren't harsh, industrial sounds, but something more musical, more human. The rhythm of the work created its own melody, a gentle percussion that spoke of patience and care. Different stains required different approaches. Mud might come out with simple scrubbing and soap, but blood required cold water and salt. Grease stains needed hot water and vigorous rubbing. Wine or berry stains might be treated with white wine or vinegar. Each woman carried in her memory a catalog of remedies, techniques passed down from her mother and grandmother, solutions discovered through years of experience. The work was social, communal. Women would help each other with particularly stubborn spots, sharing their expertise and their strength. A difficult stain became a challenge for the group to solve together. and success was celebrated by all. In many communities, laundry was not done in private courtyards, but at communal washing places, shared spaces beside rivers, streams, or large wells where women from throughout the neighborhood would gather. These places were more than just practical necessities. They were the social centers of female community life. Picture a gentle slope leading down to a clear running stream, with flat stones positioned strategically along the banks. These stones, worn smooth by countless years of use, served as natural washing boards. The water flowed constantly, carrying away soap and dirt, ensuring that each new rinse was in fresh, clean water. The women would arrive in the early morning, carrying their baskets of soiled clothes, their bars of soap, their wooden paddles and brushes. They would claim their favorite spots, perhaps a particular stone that was just the right height, or a location where the water ran at the perfect depth. These preferences were honored, part of the unspoken etiquette of the washing place. As the morning progressed, the area would fill with conversation. News was shared, gossip exchanged, advice given on everything from stubborn stains to difficult children. Young women learned not just the techniques of laundry, but the social skills that would serve them throughout their lives. It was an informal education in community, in the art of living peacefully with neighbors. The washing place was also where reputations were made and maintained. A woman known for her skill with delicate fabrics might be asked to help with a precious garment. Someone with a reputation for gossip might find herself working alone. The quality of one's laundry, the care taken with both one's own clothes and those borrowed for special occasions, was a matter of social standing. Children often accompanied their mothers to these places, splashing in the shallows, learning by observation the skills they would need in their own adult lives. The sound of their laughter mixed with the adult conversation, the splash of water, the rhythmic sounds of washing, creating a symphony of community life. Once the washing was complete, the clothes needed to be rinsed, and this was where the flowing water of streams and rivers showed its true value. Unlike modern washing machines that can rinse clothes multiple times with fresh water, medieval laundresses had to make each rinse count. The garments were lifted from their washing water, heavy with soap and loosened dirt, and carried to the flowing stream. Here, they were submerged in the current, the natural flow of the water helping to carry away the soap and any remaining grime. But this wasn't simply a matter of dunking clothes in the river, it required skill and timing. Each piece was held carefully in the current, moved and manipulated so that the water could reach every fold, every seam. Shirts were turned inside out, then right side out again. Long skirts were spread wide to catch the full force of the flow. Stockings were stretched and worked to ensure that soap didn't remain trapped in their fibers. The sound of this work was particularly beautiful, the gurgle and splash of water, the soft slapping of wet fabric, the occasional call of one woman to another asking for help with a particularly large or awkward piece. It was music made by necessity, rhythm created by generations of shared knowledge. Multiple rinses were often necessary, especially for items that had been particularly soiled or for fabrics that seemed to hold soap stubbornly. The women could tell by touch and sight when clothes were properly rinsed. The water would run clear, the fabric would feel different in their hands, clean and somehow lighter. In winter, when streams might be partially frozen, this work became more challenging. Holes had to be broken in the ice, hands worked despite the numbing cold. The contrast between the icy water and the warm clothes from their heated washing tubs created steam that rose like small spirits from the surface of the stream. After the final rinse, the clothes needed to have as much water removed as possible before drying, and this was accomplished through the ancient technique of wringing, a process that was both practical and surprisingly graceful to watch. Two women would often work together for this task, especially with larger items like sheets or tablecloths. They would stand facing each other, each grasping one end of the wet garment. Then, in a motion that required coordination and practice, they would twist the fabric, wringing out the water in spiraling streams that caught the light as they fell. The technique looked almost like a dance. The women had to move in harmony, stepping toward and away from each other, maintaining tension on the fabric while allowing it to twist naturally. Too much force would tear delicate materials, too little would leave them sopping wet and heavy for drying. For smaller items, a single person could do the wringing, but it required considerable skill. The garment was gathered in the hands, twisted into a rope-like shape, then squeezed and twisted again, each motion releasing more water. Experienced laundresses could wring out a shirt or chemise with a few efficient movements, leaving it damp but not dripping. The water that poured from the twisted clothes was surprisingly clean by this point, evidence of the thoroughness of the washing and rinsing process. It would form small puddles that quickly soaked into the earth or ran back toward the stream, completing the cycle that had begun with the gathering of water hours earlier. There was something deeply satisfying about this final squeeze, this last removal of the water that had been both enemy and ally in the cleaning process. It marked the transition from washing to drying, from the active work of cleaning to the patient work of waiting for the sun and wind to complete the transformation. The drying of clothes in the 1500s was not the simple matter of throwing wet garments into a mechanical dryer. Instead, it was an art that required knowledge of weather, wind, and the particular needs of different fabrics. It was also an opportunity to create something beautiful, transforming utilitarian necessity into a kind of outdoor sculpture. The drying area was chosen with care. It needed to be exposed to sun and wind, but protected from dust and animals. Often, this was a section of courtyard or garden, sometimes a special area near the washing place by the stream. Here, lines were strung between posts, trees, or buildings, creating a framework for the day's clean laundry. But many items weren't simply hung on lines. They were spread carefully on grass, on bushes, on specially constructed frames that allowed air to circulate around them completely. White linens were often laid on green grass, the contrast creating a beautiful patchwork across the landscape. The grass helped to bleach the fabric naturally, using the sun's power to make whites even whiter. The arrangement of the drying clothes was almost artistic. Long sheets created gentle curves as they moved in the breeze. Colorful garments, the occasional red or blue in a world dominated by earth tones, added spots of brightness to the scene. Smaller items like caps and stockings were arranged with care, creating patterns and groupings that pleased the eye. Wind was both friend and enemy in this process. A gentle breeze was perfect, lifting the fabric, helping it dry evenly, preventing the musty smell that could develop in still air. But strong winds could tear clothes from their lines, blow them into dirt, or whip them so violently that the fabric was damaged. Weather had to be watched constantly, and clothes brought in quickly if storms threatened. The drying process required patience. Thick woolens might take a full day or more to dry completely, while fine linens could be ready in just a few hours. Each fabric had its own timing, its own needs, and experienced housekeepers knew them all instinctively. Laundry in the 1500s changed dramatically with the seasons, and each time of year brought its own challenges and blessings. Understanding these seasonal rhythms was essential for anyone responsible for keeping clothes clean, and it created a deep connection between the domestic work of washing and the larger cycles of nature. Spring was perhaps the most blessed time for laundry. The days grew longer and warmer, but weren't yet scorching hot. Fresh breezes carried the scent of new grass and blooming flowers, and these same breezes were perfect for drying clothes. The heavy woolen garments that had been worn all winter could finally be washed thoroughly and packed away, while lighter linens took their place. Summer brought intense heat that could dry clothes quickly, but it also brought challenges. Water was sometimes scarce, making the precious resource even more valuable. The sun could be so strong that it bleached colored fabrics or made delicate materials brittle. Washing was often done very early in the morning before the heat became unbearable. Autumn was a time of preparation. The warm, dry days of early fall were perfect for washing and preparing the heavy clothes that would be needed for winter. But there was urgency to this work. Everyone knew that soon the weather would turn, making outdoor laundry difficult or impossible. Winter was the most challenging season for washing clothes. Water froze in buckets overnight. Wet clothes hung outside would freeze solid, requiring them to be brought indoors where they dried slowly by firelight, sometimes taking days to become completely dry. The air in houses became humid from drying laundry, and clothes often took on the smell of wood smoke from the fires that provided the only heat. Yet even winter washing had its own beauty. Picture clothes hanging by a warm fire, steam rising gently from wool and linen, the contrast between the frozen world outside and the cozy warmth within. There was something deeply satisfying about clean, dry clothes during the cold months, a comfort that seemed even more precious because it was harder won. Not all laundry in the 1500s was everyday clothing. Every household, no matter how modest, possessed certain special items that received extraordinary care: the good linens, the wedding clothes, the ceremonial garments that marked important occasions in life. These pieces were not washed weekly, but only when necessary, and then with a level of attention that bordered on reverence. Imagine a chest in the corner of a bedchamber, made of precious wood and perhaps carved with family symbols or religious motifs. Inside, wrapped carefully in herbs and laid between layers of linen, were the treasures of the household. A wedding dress that had been worn by the mother, and perhaps her mother before her. Table linens reserved for feast days and important visitors. Christening gowns that had welcomed new babies into the family for generations. When these special items needed washing, it became an event that involved the entire household. The finest soap was used, often purchased rather than homemade. The water was heated to exactly the right temperature and tested multiple times. The washing was done by the most skilled hands, often the matriarch of the family herself, who would entrust such precious items to no one else. These garments were often made of the finest materials available: silk that had traveled from distant lands, linen woven so fine it was almost transparent, wool from the softest fleeces. They represented not just clothing, but family history, social status, and sometimes the life savings of several generations. To damage such an item through careless washing would be a tragedy of almost unimaginable proportions. The drying of these special pieces was equally careful. They were never hung on common lines with everyday clothes, but were laid flat on clean surfaces, often indoors where they could be monitored constantly. Sometimes they were stretched on special frames that held them in perfect shape as they dried. Every wrinkle was smoothed, every fold arranged with precision. The storage of these clean treasures was a ritual in itself. They were folded with ceremony, often with lavender or other sweet herbs tucked between the layers. They were wrapped in the finest cloths available and returned to their chests with prayers for their preservation. These weren't just clothes being put away, but family legacies being preserved for future generations. In the world of 1500, children learned the arts of laundry not through formal instruction, but through observation and gradual participation. From their earliest years, they were present during washing days, absorbing the knowledge that would serve them throughout their lives. This learning was gentle, natural, woven into the fabric of daily life as seamlessly as threads in cloth. Very young children might simply play nearby while their mothers worked, but they were watching, listening, learning the rhythms and patterns of the work. They heard the conversations about which fabrics needed special care, which stains required particular treatments, how to judge when clothes were properly clean. This knowledge seeped into their consciousness like water into thirsty earth. As they grew older, children were given small tasks appropriate to their age and ability. A 5-year-old might help carry light items or sort clothes by color. An 8-year-old could learn to judge water temperature by touch or help with the gentler aspects of washing. By adolescence, they were full participants in the process, learning the subtleties that separated adequate work from excellence. The teaching was patient, repetitive, filled with the kind of wisdom that could only be gained through years of experience. A mother might guide her daughter's hands as she learned to wring out a delicate chemise, showing her the exact pressure needed, the proper twist that would remove water without damaging fabric. A grandmother might share the secret of a particular stain removal technique passed down through generations of women in the family. Boys, too, learn these skills, for in many households everyone participated in the essential work of keeping clothes clean. They might be the ones responsible for heating water, tending fires, or carrying heavy baskets. The knowledge they gained would serve them well when they established their own households or found themselves in situations where these skills were necessary. There was something beautiful about this method of learning. No textbooks or formal lessons, but knowledge passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, in the same way that the clothes themselves passed from person to person. It created a continuity, a connection between past and future that was as strong as the threads that held the garments together. Though the people of 1500 didn't understand the scientific principles behind their cleaning methods, they had developed through centuries of trial and error a sophisticated understanding of what worked and why. Their techniques were based on practical chemistry, though they would have described it simply as knowledge passed down from their ancestors. They knew, for instance, that different types of dirt required different approaches. Grease and oil-based stains needed hot water and strong soap because heat helped dissolve fats, and oils made similar substances dissolve into each other. They didn't know about molecular structures, but they understood that like dissolves like through generations of practical experience. They had discovered that certain plant extracts could enhance their cleaning power. Soapwort, a plant that naturally produces saponins, could create a gentle cleansing foam. Wood ash, rich in potassium compounds, could help break down organic stains. White wine or vinegar, with their natural acids, could tackle certain types of discoloration that soap alone couldn't handle. The timing of their processes had also been refined through experience. They knew that soaking clothes allowed water to penetrate fibers and loosen embedded dirt, making the actual washing more effective. They understood that certain fabrics needed gentle treatment while others could withstand vigorous scrubbing. The temperature of water was crucial, and they had developed ways to judge it precisely without thermometers. Too hot would set certain stains permanently or damage delicate fibers. Too cool wouldn't activate the cleaning power of their soaps. The perfect temperature was something they could sense with their hands, a skill developed through years of practice. They had also discovered natural bleaching agents. Sunlight could whiten linens naturally, but they knew that too much exposure would weaken the fibers. Buttermilk could remove some stains that soap couldn't touch. Salt could help with blood stains, drawing out the proteins that made them so persistent. Even their understanding of water itself was sophisticated. They knew that soft water from rain or certain springs was better for washing than hard water from wells with high mineral content. Hard water left soap scum and didn't rinse as cleanly. They couldn't explain calcium and magnesium ions, but they understood the practical effects and adjusted their techniques accordingly. Washing day wasn't just about cleaning clothes, it was about maintaining the social fabric of the community. The shared work created bonds between neighbors, opportunities for cooperation, and a network of mutual support that extended far beyond laundry. When a family faced illness or hardship, the community washing place became a source of practical help. Neighbors would quietly take on extra washing, ensuring that the sick family's clothes stayed clean even when they couldn't manage the work themselves. A new mother might find her washing mysteriously done by caring neighbors who understood the challenges of managing household work with a newborn. Young women approaching marriage learned not just the technical skills of laundry, but the social graces that would help them maintain good relationships with their future neighbors. They observed how disputes were handled, how gossip was managed, how the delicate balance of community life was maintained through countless small acts of consideration and courtesy. The washing place was also where reputations were built and sometimes lost. A woman known for her skill with delicate fabrics might find herself entrusted with precious items belonging to neighbors. Someone with a reputation for carelessness might discover that others were reluctant to work near her, fearing damage to their own clothes. But the washing place was also a source of innovation and shared knowledge. When someone discovered a new technique for removing a particular type of stain, the information spread quickly through the community. New recipes for soap, better methods for arranging drying clothes, tricks for managing difficult fabrics, all of this knowledge was shared freely, making everyone's work easier and more effective. The conversations that flowed around the washing work created a rich tapestry of community life. News of births and deaths, courtships and marriages, business dealings and family concerns. All of this was woven together in the gentle rhythm of shared labor. The work provided a natural cadence for conversation, periods of focused attention alternating with times when talk could flow freely. In the medieval world, cleanliness was not just a practical matter, but something that touched on deeper spiritual concerns. The connection between physical cleanliness and spiritual purity was understood intuitively, making the weekly washing ritual something that resonated on multiple levels of meaning. The church taught that cleanliness was next to godliness, and this wasn't merely a metaphor. Clean clothes for Sunday worship were considered a mark of respect for the sacred. The finest, cleanest garments were saved for religious observances, and the work of preparing them was seen as a form of devotion in itself. There were also beliefs about the spiritual properties of water itself. Holy water blessed by priests was considered to have special cleansing power, and sometimes a few drops might be added to washing water for particularly precious items. Springs and wells were often associated with saints or miracles, and water from these sources was thought to impart special virtues to anything washed in it. The timing of washing could also have spiritual significance. Some families avoided washing on certain saints' days or during specific religious seasons. Others believed that clothes washed on particular days would have enhanced properties, greater durability, better appearance, or protection from harm. The herbs and flowers used to scent clean clothes often had religious associations. Lavender was associated with purity and protection. Rosemary was believed to have protective properties and was often used in washing water for children's clothes. These weren't just pleasant scents, but spiritual safeguards woven into the practical work of daily life. Even the act of washing itself could be seen as a form of meditation or prayer. The repetitive motions, the focus required, the transformation from dirty to clean, all of this created a natural rhythm that could lift the mind toward higher thoughts. Many women found that their most profound spiritual insights came during the quiet, focused work of caring for their family's clothes. The rhythm of laundry in the 1500s followed not just the seasons of the year, but the seasons of human life. Each stage of existence brought its own particular washing challenges and rituals, creating a lifetime of accumulated knowledge and changing needs. The washing of baby clothes was perhaps the most delicate work of all. Tiny garments required the gentlest possible handling, the mildest soaps, the softest water. New mothers learned special techniques for removing the stains that came with caring for infants, and experienced mothers shared their knowledge freely, understanding that the health and comfort of babies was everyone's concern. As children grew, their clothes reflected their increasingly active lives. Grass stains from playing in meadows, mud from helping with farm work, tears from adventures and misadventures, each mark told a story of a child's growing engagement with the world. The washing of these clothes became a kind of archaeology of childhood, each stain a memory preserved in fabric. The clothes of adolescents and young adults required special attention for different reasons. These were the years when appearance mattered most, when a well-maintained wardrobe could influence social standing and marriage prospects. Extra care was taken with the washing and pressing of garments that would be worn to church, to markets, to social gatherings where young people might meet their future spouses. Marriage brought new challenges and new opportunities. Combining two households meant merging different washing traditions, different techniques, different standards of cleanliness. Young brides often had to learn new methods from their mothers-in-law, adapting their childhood knowledge to new circumstances and expectations. The middle years of life often brought the greatest washing burdens. Large families meant enormous amounts of laundry, but also the helping hands of older children. This was when washing skills reached their peak, when experience and necessity combined to create true expertise in the management of household textiles. In old age, the physical demands of washing became more challenging, but the accumulated knowledge became a precious resource for younger generations. Elderly women became the repositories of generations of washing wisdom. Their advice sought on the most difficult problems of stain removal and fabric care. In the economy of the 1500s, clean clothes represented significant value. and the work of maintaining them was an important contribution to household wealth. Understanding this economic dimension helps us appreciate why laundry was taken so seriously and why the skills involved were so highly valued. Clothing represented a substantial investment for any family. A single good wool cloak might cost the equivalent of a month's wages for a skilled craftsman. A fine linen shirt could represent several days' earnings. When you consider that most people owned only a few complete outfits, the importance of keeping them clean and well-maintained becomes clear. The soap used in washing was itself a valuable commodity. Homemade soap required time, skill, and ingredients that had to be carefully gathered and prepared. Commercial soap, when available, was expensive and often had to be purchased from traveling merchants. Every bar of soap represented a real economic cost that had to be balanced against the value of the clothes being cleaned. Water, too, had economic value, especially in urban areas where it might have to be purchased from water carriers or where access to wells and springs was controlled by guilds or authorities. The fuel needed to heat washing water, wood, charcoal, or other combustible materials, also represented real costs that had to be managed carefully. The time invested in laundry was perhaps the most significant economic factor. A full day's washing represented a day when other productive work couldn't be done. Spinning, weaving, cooking, gardening, care of animals. All of these income-producing or subsistence activities had to be set aside for the essential work of maintaining clothes. Professional laundresses, women who made their living by washing clothes for others, were an important part of the urban economy. These skilled workers commanded good wages because their expertise was valuable and their work was essential. They often specialized in particular types of washing, delicate fabrics, fine linens, or the removal of difficult stains. The economic value of laundry skills extended beyond mere washing. Women who could clean and maintain textiles effectively were highly valued as wives and household managers. These skills could mean the difference between a wardrobe that lasted for years and one that quickly became unwearable, representing a real economic advantage for any household. Once clothes were clean and dry, they weren't simply folded and put away. The final step in the laundry process was pressing and smoothing, a skill that transformed wrinkled, shapeless garments back into crisp, wearable clothing. This was an art that required its own set of tools, techniques, and considerable skill. The primary tool for this work was the iron, though it bore little resemblance to our modern electric appliances. Medieval irons were solid pieces of metal, often shaped like a triangle with a handle, that were heated by placing them in fires or on hot coals. They were heavy, requiring strong arms to manage, and they retained heat for only a limited time before needing to be reheated. The work of ironing was done on special boards or tables, often padded with layers of cloth to provide a smooth surface. The iron had to be tested carefully before each use. Too hot and it would scorch the fabric, too cool and it wouldn't remove the wrinkles. This testing was done by sprinkling a few drops of water on the iron's surface and watching how quickly they evaporated, or by holding the iron close to the cheek to feel its warmth. Different fabrics required different approaches to pressing. Linen could withstand fairly high heat and firm pressure, and indeed looked best when pressed quite smooth. Wool needed gentler treatment, often being pressed with a cloth laid over it to prevent damage to the fibers. Silk, when it was available, required the most delicate touch of all. But not all smoothing was done with irons. Many garments were simply stretched and arranged carefully while still damp from washing, then weighted down with stones or wooden boards as they dried. This natural pressing created smooth, wrinkle-free clothes without the risk of heat damage. The process of pressing was meditative, requiring focus and patience. Each garment was handled carefully, smoothed section by section, with attention to details like collars, cuffs, and seams that could easily be pressed into permanent creases if not handled properly. The warm iron moved across the fabric in steady, overlapping strokes, transforming chaos into order, wrinkles into smoothness. The satisfaction of this work was immediate and visible. Clothes that had emerged from drying looking rumpled and shapeless were transformed into garments that looked almost new, ready to be worn with pride to church, market, or social gatherings. Clean clothes in the 1500s didn't just look different from dirty ones. They smelled different too, carrying with them the fragrances of the herbs, flowers, and natural materials used in their washing and storage. This olfactory dimension of cleanliness was as important as the visual one, perhaps more so in a world where synthetic fragrances didn't exist. The soap itself contributed its own scent to freshly washed clothes. Soap made with tallow had an honest, clean smell that spoke of rendered fats and wood ash. Soap made with olive oil, when it could be obtained, left clothes with a subtly different fragrance, softer and somehow more luxurious. These weren't unpleasant smells, but natural ones that people associated with cleanliness and care. But the real artistry came in the addition of herbs and flowers to both the washing water and the storage of clean clothes. Lavender was perhaps the most prized addition. Its sweet, calming scent believed to repel insects while adding a touch of luxury to everyday garments. Rosemary, with its sharp, resinous fragrance, was thought to have protective properties and was often used for children's clothes. Other herbs found their way into laundry water depending on the season and what was available. Fresh mint in summer, dried chamomile in winter, sweet woodruff in spring. Each addition changed not just the scent but the entire experience of wearing the clothes. These weren't just practical additions but expressions of care, small luxuries that made the necessary work of laundry into something approaching art. The drying process itself contributed to the fragrance of clean clothes. Garments hung outside absorbed the sense of their environment. Fresh air, blooming flowers, new grass, the clean smell that comes after rain. Clothes dried indoors by the fire might carry subtle hints of wood smoke, creating a cozy, homey fragrance that was deeply comforting. The storage of clean clothes was another opportunity to add pleasant scents. Sachets made from scraps of fabric and filled with dried herbs were tucked between folded garments. Wooden chests were lined with aromatic woods or scented with drops of precious oils. Some families kept small bundles of dried herbs in their clothing storage, refreshing them regularly to maintain their effectiveness. The result was that clean clothes became a kind of personal perfume, subtle but distinctive, that announced the wearer's attention to cleanliness and self-care. In a world where personal hygiene was more challenging than today, these scented garments were an important way of maintaining social standing and personal comfort. Every stain told a story, and the experienced laundresses of the 1500s could read these stories like books. They understood not just how to remove different types of stains, but what each mark revealed about the life of the garment and its wearer. This knowledge was part chemistry, part detective work, and part intuitive understanding of the materials they worked with. Blood stains were common and required immediate attention. Fresh blood could often be removed with cold water and salt, but old blood, set by heat or age, required more sophisticated techniques. Some laundresses swore by soaking blood-stained items in their own saliva, understanding intuitively that certain enzymes could break down the proteins that made blood stains so persistent. Food stains each had their own characteristics and remedies. Grease from cooking might be treated with hot water and strong soap, or sometimes with a paste made from wood ash and water. Fruit stains, particularly from berries, might be treated with white wine or vinegar, the acid helping to break down the organic compounds that created the color. Wine stains were particularly challenging because they were often on the finest clothes, garments worn to celebrations and social gatherings where wine was served. The treatment had to be immediate and gentle, preserving both the fabric and the social standing of the wearer. Salt was often the first remedy, absorbing the liquid before it could set permanently. Mud stains were perhaps the most common of all, reflecting the unpaved roads and outdoor work that characterized medieval life. The secret to mud stains was patience. allowing them to dry completely before attempting removal, then brushing away the dried earth before washing. Wet mud, if scrubbed immediately, would only work deeper into the fabric fibers. Sweat stains, particularly in the areas around collars and underarms, required regular attention. These weren't just aesthetic problems but practical ones, as the salts and acids in perspiration could actually weaken fabric fibers over time. Vinegar was often used to neutralize these effects, extending the life of garments that were too valuable to replace frequently. Each type of stain also carried social implications. A stain from honest work, mud from farming, soot from cooking, was more acceptable than stains that suggested carelessness or improper behavior. The skill of a laundress was often judged by her ability to remove not just the physical mark but the social stigma that might accompany it. After the long day of washing, rinsing, wringing, and hanging clothes to dry, there came a different kind of time. The patient hours of waiting while sun and wind completed the work that human hands had begun. This was not idle time, but a different rhythm of activity, punctuated by the need to check on the drying clothes, to adjust their position, to bring them in if weather threatened. The afternoon hours of washing day had their own peaceful quality. The most intensive work was done. The clothes were hung and spread in their appointed places, and now came the gentle task of monitoring their progress. A skilled laundress could tell by sight and touch when different items were ready to be brought in. The way linen looked when it was perfectly dry, the feel of wool that still needed more time in the sun. This monitoring was often combined with other gentle tasks. Mending could be done while keeping an eye on the drying clothes. Spinning might occupy the hands while the mind stayed alert to changes in weather or the condition of the laundry. Children could be minded, meals prepared, gardens tended, all while maintaining the watchful care that proper drying required. The clothes themselves seemed to have their own rhythm as they dried. Heavy items like cloaks and blankets hung still in the early hours, gradually becoming lighter and more responsive to breezes as the water evaporated. Lighter garments like shirts and chemises might flutter and dance in the slightest wind, their movements a kind of celebration of returning dryness. There was something deeply satisfying about the gradual transformation from wet to dry, from heavy to light, from limp to crisp. It was a visible reminder of the natural forces at work, of the partnership between human effort and the powers of sun, wind, and time. The patience required for this process was itself a kind of meditation, a reminder that some things could not be hurried. As the day progressed and items became ready, they were brought in with the same care that had characterized the entire process. Each piece was checked for complete dryness, folded or hung properly, sorted according to its destination. The satisfaction of clean, dry clothes ready for storage or immediate use was the reward for the day's long labor. The final act of the laundry process was the careful folding and storing of clean, dry clothes. This was not a hurried task to be completed as quickly as possible, but a deliberate ceremony that ensured the day's work would be preserved and the clothes would remain in good condition until they were needed again. Each type of garment had its own proper method of folding, techniques that had been developed over generations to minimize wrinkles and preserve the shape of the clothing. Shirts were folded along natural seam lines, with sleeves arranged so they wouldn't create permanent creases. Long skirts were folded carefully to avoid sharp creases that might weaken the fabric over time. The folding was often done on a clean surface, sometimes with a layer of fresh linen laid down to protect the clothes from any dust or debris. Each piece was handled with the same care that had characterized the entire washing process, smoothed gently, checked for any missed spots or damage that might need attention. Delicate items received special treatment. Fine linens might be rolled around wooden forms to prevent creasing. Woolen garments were folded loosely to allow the fibers to maintain their natural loft. Anything with decorative elements, embroidery, trim, buttons was folded so these details wouldn't be stressed or damaged. The act of folding was also an opportunity for inventory and assessment. Each garment was examined as it was folded, checked for wear, small tears, or areas that might need reinforcement before the next washing. This wasn't just housekeeping, but the kind of preventive care that could extend the life of valuable clothing significantly. As the clothes were folded, they were often sorted according to their destination. Everyday clothes might go to one chest, while better garments were reserved for another. Children's clothes were separated from adults. Work clothes were distinguished from church clothes. This sorting was part of the organization that made household management possible. The folded clothes were then placed in their storage locations with the same care that had characterized their washing. Heavier items went to the bottom of chests, lighter ones on top. Herbs or sachets were distributed among the layers. Everything was arranged so that items could be retrieved without disturbing the rest of the carefully organized collection. As the sun began to set on washing day, there was a deep satisfaction that came from seeing the week's laundry transformed from a pile of soiled garments into clean, fresh clothing ready for another week of wear. This satisfaction was both practical and spiritual, the reward for a day of honest, necessary work completed with skill and care. The physical signs of the day's accomplishment were everywhere. Chests filled with clean, properly folded clothes. Shelves lined with freshly laundered linens. The lingering scent of herbs and clean fabric in the air. The sight of the washing area, now cleaned and organized, ready for the next week's work. These were the visible rewards of labor well done. But the satisfaction went deeper than these surface signs. There was something profoundly meaningful about the transformation that had taken place. Clothes that had been worn, soiled, and tired had been restored to freshness and usefulness. The cycle of use and renewal had been completed once again, connecting the household to the eternal rhythms of cleaning and restoration that sustained human life. The women who had done this work could feel pride in their skills, in the knowledge that they had preserved their family's clothing, extended its useful life, and maintained the standards of cleanliness that marked a well-run household. This wasn't just drudgery completed, but craft practiced, expertise demonstrated, care expressed in the most practical possible way. The evening meal on washing day often had a special quality, seasoned by the satisfaction of important work completed. Families gathered around tables knowing that their clothes were clean and ready for the week ahead. There was security in this knowledge, comfort in the rhythm of renewal that washing day represented. As night fell and candles were lit, the day's work continued to provide satisfaction. Clean night clothes felt softer against skin tired from the day's labor. Fresh linens on beds seemed to offer deeper rest. The house itself felt renewed, refreshed by the day's attention to cleanliness and order. The completion of washing day was also the beginning of anticipation for the week ahead. Clean clothes meant being ready for whatever the coming days might bring. Work in the fields, visits to market, attendance at church, social gatherings. The foundation of cleanliness had been laid for all of these activities. As we near the end of our gentle journey through the laundry practices of the 1500s, it's worth reflecting on the threads that connect us to those long-ago washerwomen, the continuities that span 5 centuries of technological change and social transformation. Despite all that has changed, something essential remains the same in our relationship with clothing and cleanliness. The basic human need for clean clothes hasn't changed, even though our methods have been revolutionized. We still feel the satisfaction of fresh, clean garments against our skin. We still understand the confidence that comes from being well-dressed and clean. We still recognize the care that goes into maintaining clothing, even if we express it differently than our ancestors did. The social aspects of laundry, too, continue in modified forms. Though we may not gather at communal washing places, we still share knowledge about stain removal, still help neighbors in times of need, still take pride in our household management skills. The community of women supporting each other through the challenges of domestic life persists, even in changed circumstances. The economic value of clothing care remains significant, though expressed differently. We may not spend entire days washing clothes by hand, but we still invest in quality garments, still value the skills that can extend their useful life, still understand that proper care represents real financial savings over time. Even the seasonal rhythms persist in modified forms. We still adjust our laundry practices to weather conditions, still feel the satisfaction of line-drying clothes in fresh air, still appreciate the way sunlight can naturally bleach and freshen fabric. The partnership between human effort and natural forces continues, even if it's no longer our primary cleaning method. The knowledge passed from generation to generation, though changed in content, continues in spirit. We still learn from our mothers and grandmothers, still develop our own techniques through trial and error, still pass on what we've learned to those who come after us. The continuity of domestic wisdom spans centuries, adapting to new circumstances while preserving essential insights. Perhaps most importantly, the care and attention that characterized medieval laundry, the respect for clothing as valuable, the patience with processes that couldn't be hurried, the understanding that maintenance is essential to preservation. These attitudes can still enrich our relationship with our possessions and our environment. And so our journey through the washing practices of 5 centuries ago draws to its close. Like the ending of a long day's work when the last garment is folded and placed in its proper place. We've walked together through the rhythms of a different time, felt the satisfaction of work done with patience and skill, understood the care that transformed necessity into something approaching art. As you rest here in the comfort of your modern bed, surrounded by the conveniences that make our lives so different from those of our ancestors, perhaps you can still feel some connection to those women who rose early on Monday mornings to begin their weekly ritual of renewal. Their world was harder in many ways, more demanding of physical strength and patience, but it was also richer in certain experiences we've lost. They knew the satisfaction of work completed entirely by their own hands. They understood the social connections that came from shared labor. They appreciated the value of possessions in ways that our abundance sometimes makes difficult. They lived in harmony with natural rhythms in ways that our controlled environments rarely allow. But they also knew, as we do, the simple pleasure of clean clothes, the comfort of fresh linens, the confidence that comes from being well cared for. These basic human experiences connect us across the centuries, reminding us that beneath all the changes in technology and lifestyle, the fundamental needs and satisfactions of human life remain remarkably constant. As sleep begins to claim you, let yourself drift gently backward through time, carrying with you the images of patient hands working with soap and water, of clothes dancing in the breeze, of communities gathered around the essential work of caring for each other. Let the rhythm of their work become the rhythm of your breathing, slow and steady and sure. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of this long tradition of care, this eternal cycle of use and renewal, of making dirty things clean, of preserving what is valuable, of preparing for tomorrow with the same patience and attention that has sustained human life for countless generations. Sleep well and dream of clean water flowing over smooth stones, of sunlight warming white linen, of the satisfied tiredness that comes from honest work completed, of the gentle hands that have cared for clothing and families through all the centuries of human life. Sweet dreams.